I just remember 2005, September 2005. Now, that was a pretty bad year. So it was the 2nd of September 2005, and I had a good friend who was flying on a Nimrod. Now, this was the Nimrod which basically all of the report is out there now, and it led to the Haddon Cave inquiry. So this was the Nimrod that essentially was air-to-air refueled and then basically blew up over Afghanistan because it caught fire, exploded about 3,000 feet above the ground, and 14 people died, including a mate that I went through flying training with. Within a couple of days, I was back flying over Afghanistan and refueling F-18s because I was on the tanker, and it was the tanker that refueled the Nimrod, and that was quite a strange place to be. And we were up. We'd done our frag for the evening, so we refueled all of our people, and we sat there. We weren't allowed to be let off station, so we couldn't go home until we were bingo fuel, i.e. minimum fuel to go back to our base in Muscat. And then there was a mayday, and we are there going, okay, that's interesting. Don't hear maydays all the time, and we're just sat there listening away. And it was basically a pair of F-18s. And one of the F-18s had lost half his hydraulics. And he was considering, and it was one of the ones from the carrier, he was considering diverting to Kandahar, but they were fairly sure that if he diverted to Kandahar, then they'd never get that F-18 out of there because they didn't have the maintenance and they didn't have the other aspects. You can't take it apart and you're not going to fly back to the carrier. So they were pretty worried about that. And so what they wanted to do was refuel it and have someone refuel it all the way down the boulevard, the Pakistan corridor. So anyway, KC 135 shouts up and say, "Hey, I've got a bit of gas," and it had about 5,000 pounds spare gas, and it was actually the tanker above us. So we were at 26,000 feet, and it was at 27,000 feet, and they needed to get down. Anyway, lo and behold, we had our hoses out. And these F-18s came up and thought they were formating on the KC-135, but they were formating on us, and the one with the hydraulics problem had plugged into us. And so our amber light had turned into a green light, and he was taking fuel from us. And so we just let them know and let the TAC air traffic know that he's actually plugged into us. And it was like, okay, that's fine. Can you take him down the boulevard? And it was like, yeah, I think we can. And by this point, the KC-135 had 5,000 pounds of fuel. We had 30 tons of fuel, so we had 66,000 pounds of spare fuel. And it was like, yeah, we got loads of gas. We're happy to do this. So we picked up his mate. Now we only have one hose. We've got two hoses, but the L1011 you can only refuel one hose at a time, so single point refueler. And so they were kind of yo-yoing backwards and forwards, and we made to go down to the boulevard. And then his mate comes up and goes, "Is there any chance, just in case he loses any more hydraulics, that we can get the gear down and get the flaps down?" And it was like, okay, how slow do you need to go? And it was actually below our minimum refueling speed, but it was, we understood the operational requirement and went, yeah, okay. So we put our slat sail and got our first kind of stage of flap out and cracked on down the boulevard. And this guy was plugging in, and he was you could tell he was nervous on the radio, and it was like, and then he was plugging in, but because he'd put all of his wheels down and all of his flaps down, he now had loads of drag and didn't actually have that much power because he was so slow. And so we now had to toboggan, and so we weren't in the boulevard, and we came down to around about 15,000 feet, and then it was 14,000 feet over Pakistan, and so we were letting Karachi know, and then we kind of took on the Mayday call sign, and it all got really interesting. And then in the end, he got loads of fuel, or we got fuel. We took them all the way back to around about sort of 50 miles away from the carrier. They managed to land safely on the carrier, and this F-18 had got back, and that was so rewarding. And we went back and had a couple of beers in Muscat, and we were kind of high-fiving, going, "This is amazing." Now, you just can't do that in the airlines. And that was that was just one of my stories when I go, I recognise why loads of people are leaving, quality of life, money, and things like that. But but for me, having situations like that, and the low of what had happened on the 2nd of September, where I'd lost a mate, and he died in the most horrific way, and then a couple of days later, you'd had a material impact on someone else's circumstance, and you go, okay, there's something in this. And by then, I'd only been operational for a couple of years, but it kind of solidified my rationale for being in the military.
Yeah, highs and lows, right place, right time. It can go wrong place, wrong time. All that applies. What was a little bit of the back? Can you give me a little bit of background on the Nimrod mishap? Because I'm not too familiar with that. I know it happened, but that's about the extent of it.
So there's been a full inquiry in the UK on this. So the Nimrod was being refueled, and essentially the Nimrod is an old aircraft, and I think it's I'm not a Nimrod guy, but I think it had about 14 fuel tanks, 7 on one side, 7 on the other. When it gets refueled, as some fuel is transitioning from one fuel tank to another, you might end up with a bit of an overpressure in one of the fuel tanks. And when it overpressures, clearly there's a drain valve, so some of the fuel can come out. So some of this fuel was leaving the overpressure valve, and it was streamlining down the fuselage, and then it was being sucked into the bomb bay. So the Nimrod used to be able to carry torpedoes and things like that. So it's been sucked into the bomb bay of the Nimrod. Inside the bomb bay, there was a fire detection system, but not a fire suppression system. And inside the Nimrod was also I think it's the environmental control system, which some parts got hot. So you've now got fuel being sucked in. You've got a hot part of the environmental control system, and it was catching fire. So every once in a while, I think they get an intermittent fuel detection, and it was kind of being accepted because they couldn't find any signs of fire or fire damage, and risk was being taken because of the operational imperative. The Nimrod was being used for a very important intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance job. So the risk was being taken on this fateful day. The aircraft started at 29,000 feet. It was one of my good friends who was, or two of my good friends that we were refueling. They were doing the last sortie of their TriStar detachment in the morning, and they were going to come back and hand the aircraft over for us, and we were going to do the first sortie of our detachment. That's the way it was going to work. But they didn't come home, and as in the TriStar didn't come home on time, and then an operation to kind of close out all the communications was called, and something was going on. And essentially, the Nimrod had this fire detection system. The fire detection had detected a fire. The fire didn't go out, and so they called a mayday. There was a Harrier, one of our UK Harriers, on side and went and formated, but the Nimrod started an emergency descent to get into Kandahar. The fire took hold and spread throughout the aircraft, and ultimately the aircraft didn't reach the ground. It wasn't able to get into Kandahar. So it was an awful situation, and so then the investigation looked into the causes of why risk was being taken, and who should hold the risk and being legally accountable and things like that. But all of those names are on the Hall of Fame of heroes within one of our headquarters, and those guys were doing a brilliant job, and it's just really, really sad. But that specific incident led to the cancellation of a couple of programs and a whole new look at the way we manage risk within the Royal Air Force. And 14 people died on that day. 2nd of September 2006 was the year. And
Jeez. With managing risk, how did it change? Did it elevate the decision matrix, or is it what changed?
What changed? So there's a very clear delineation now between operational risk, things that you need to do kind of in the spur of the moment, and then operating risk. Acceptable levels of risk that you can take, and for operating risk, you go through a very systematic approach to mid-air collision would be a good one. So we call that loss of safe separation. But if you are flying in places where there isn't an air traffic control or it's really, really busy, then loss of safe separation is one of the biggest risks that can cause, loss of an aircraft. And so only certain people now at the 06 level, then at the 2-star level, and then ultimately our chief of the air staff, only those people can take risk and hold that risk. And they are then legally accountable for the risks that they take. Whereas previously it was risk was being taken at every single level. And there was a blurring between operational risk. Okay, we really need to do this because this mission is really important. And then some people would say, okay, I'm not sure that we should be taking this risk day after day after day. And then it was being elevated to the next level, say the major level. And then it would be elevated to the 05 level, then the 06 level. And lots of people are taking risks. And then there was the almost the accusation that those people were then not accountable. Once they left the job, they weren't accountable. Whereas now the main thing is those people who take risk are legally accountable for the risks they've taken throughout the rest of their life. So they are personally accountable, which makes you think about things, right? So if I go into a job, as an 06, my next job might be Commander Air Wing, Bryce Norton, and I might be taking some risks on loss of safe separation. Why did, a capability program, or why was that aircraft flying in that position in the sky at a certain time, and then it hits a glider or it hits a powered aircraft, and you just go, okay, well, to the best of my knowledge, I was taking risk which was acceptable, as low as reasonably practicable is what we call it, and it's a tolerable risk. But if someone dies, they're going to make sure that you've made the right decisions based on the right evidence and things like that. And even in 10 years' time, if I've made a decision, it will track back to me rather than just the next person. So
interesting,
yeah, personally accountable.
Because for our military, commanders are moving every 2 years. People are moving every 1 to 3 years, and so you can inherit a program that has risk or is a bad deal. I mean, it can go both ways, right? But like ultimately, if you're the guy who's holding the baton at that point, like you might have been day 2 or month 2 into the job, like you're going to be the one who gets crushed, and the previous commanders, for the most part, like it's not going to touch them or scathe them. Like they're on to the next job. So that's interesting to be able to kind of go back in time, and I think also force you to think. I can see maybe one fault with that. I'm curious to get your opinion. Do you think that we call it, CYA, cover your ass? Like, are you less risk averse and willing to take a risk, thinking that, hey, it's just easier to play it safe all the time than do it? Because inherently the military, you're taking risk. I mean, you're breaking things and doing dangerous things.
Yeah, so I've got 2 perspectives, and they are definitely Kev perspectives. So post Haddon Cave, we built up a safety empire, appropriately so, because what happened on the Nimrod can never really happen again, because people taking risks, not being accountable for those risks, and then as risk came up, there wasn't the evidence base to be able to fully understand what the other guy had signed off, and and the operational imperative was the overriding factor that meant the aircraft took off, and even some people who were flying felt uncomfortable. So you can't allow that to happen again. However, as you say, we're in the military, and in the military, you need to go against adversaries, and you need to be able to be stand tall and make sure you're counted and have a decisive impact on the battlefield. That is your role in that military domain. And at the moment, and what we did is we built this empire out of safety. Rightly so, to make sure things were safety, but because we're always resource limited, anyone who was spare, who was focused on the thinking about how we do military operations, kind of went into the safety kind of domain, and so therefore we can go and deliver basic operations, and guess what, Daesh, really exciting to go to the go and do the counter Daesh campaign, but they weren't a state actor. And in the end, it was pretty straightforward to roll them back. And then in the end, it turned into a counter-terrorism thing, which we're all comfortable because of Afghanistan. But people weren't thinking about state on state. People were more than happy to think about safety. Now, I'm overemphasizing for effect, but if you need to make sure that you're as safe as possible, then there is the accusation that you've become more risk averse. And I do want people thinking about how we're going to beat potential adversaries. That is also one of the rules of the military.